Ginger. College football, the baby brother to America's most popular viewing sport, baseball. But for some reason, this version of football's popularity has been continuously increasing, while the NFL's popularity has been declining. Whether this be because the whole kneeling controversy or the fact that the Patriots win the Super Bowl every year is up for debate. But there is no doubt that college football's popularity will continue to increase as more and more Americans are college educated, and there is literally nothing else to do that is affordable as a college student. Now, like every other sport in college, there are conferences in which certain teams compete against each other to see who is the best in said conference. Of course, there are exceptions where certain teams aren't in conferences, but that doesn't matter for this video. Usually the team with the highest number of wins against in-conference opponents will advance to the championship, with head-to-head matches being tiebreakers. So, hypothetically, a team with a worse overall record could advance to the championship above a team that had a better in-conference record. We saw this in Auburn's case this year, as they held a 10-2 record and made it to the championship despite Alabama having the better record at 11-1. And this system mostly makes sense. The best team gets to play for a championship in their conference, and if they win, they get a trophy. Simple. But some teams who aren't in a conference or in a weaker conference want to win more. So they create games after the conference championship series called bowl games. If your team has at least 6 wins on the season, congratulations, you're technically good enough to play in a bowl game. It's pretty much college football's version of a participation trophy. But what about the playoffs? We already know who the best in each conference is, and we're giving out trophies to teams that happen to win their bowl games. But we want more. We want to see who the best team in the nation is. So a playoff system seems acceptable, right? We know who the best in the separate conferences are now, so we should have a playoff to determine who the best overall is. And to this, college football said, nah. How about we make it really complicated? I mean, sure, every other college sport has its own annual championship event that has lots of people watch, but us already being the most popular college sport, surely we don't need that. And for some reason, this method stayed until 2014, when the playoffs were created. But keep in mind, these playoffs are fake. We'll get to that in a minute, because that has a lot to do with why UCF says they are national champions. Just a quick side note here. If you already know about how the AP poll and the coaches poll works and the whole history of that, then you can go ahead and skip to 527, because that's when I actually start my argument against the system and UCF's claim to the championship. Technically, the first national champion was Princeton in 1869, but to call this team an actual champion is more ridiculous than calling UCF a champion, as the game of football was almost like soccer back then, and Princeton literally won 1 game in a 2-game season, both of which were against Rutgers, who was the only team at the time. So to start my argument against UCF and the national championship as a whole, we're going to fast forward 6 decades to 1936, when football looks a lot more like it does now. This year, college football finally decided it was time to crown their champion in a civilized manner. But no, not with playoffs, with a voting system called the AP poll. The AP poll itself isn't an NCAA officiated thing. They don't actually legally get to determine who the national champion is. This makes the distribution of the title really confusing. In other words, a team doesn't have to win the poll to claim a national title, because the poll itself doesn't have domain over the NCAA. So technically, any team can claim a title if they believe they deserve it. The AP system itself is pretty straightforward, though. A bunch of people vote for the team who they think deserves national champion, and the one with the most votes wins. However, it's easy to see the flaw in the system, as it's more of a popularity contest than an actual who's the best football team contest. The AP poll did take measures to improve this, including moving voting to after the bowl season, but not before another bowl said they could claim national champion. It just made everything more confusing. The coaches poll. It's composed of, you guessed it, coaches, which kind of makes it seem even more biased than the AP poll if you think about it. But this is where the controversy and the confusion begins, because now with 2 polls declaring the champion, there are bound to be discrepancies. The best example of this is the 1997 season, in which 2 separate teams were proclaimed the national champion, Nebraska and Michigan. For some reason, the bowl games that year did not feature a number 1 versus a number 2 matchup between the two, even though they had been ranked number 1 and number 2 for 3 weeks straight on both polls. They even had something called the Bowl Alliance system, which its only goal of its entire existence was to put the number 1 and the number 2 teams against each other in the bowl season. That went well. Instead, number 1 played number 8 and number 2 played number 3. This made the polls crazy close, as both thought number 1 and number 2 deserved to win, and both polls claimed different teams as champions, and subsequently both teams claimed their national champion. Remember, claiming that you're national champion isn't the same thing as winning the national champion, as no team can actually win a national title by the NCAA's rule. But because the two polls both declared different winners, they both thought they had won, and they both claimed a title. Now, the college football world was tired of this, and they told themselves, okay, in order to have a clear winner, we have to have number 1 play number 2 in a bowl game. And in 1998, the BCS National Championship game was born to do just that. And it worked fairly well to decide the national champion. However, after having multiple seasons of teams that had 1 to 2 losses competing for 2 spots, they decided that they should open it up to more teams. Here is where they actually invented the playoffs. I don't think invented is the right word, though. This system, implemented in 2014, was designed to allow more teams to have a shot to play for the national title, still in quotes. And like the AP and coaches poll, it declared its own national champion and gave out its own trophy. Fans of college football rejoiced! Finally, there would be an actual championship game where the best team wins, and more teams would have a chance to... Oh wait, only 4 teams are allowed in? What? Before even hearing about the UCF case, I always thought 4 teams was way too little. And I know that there's an argument that 4 teams is good because that means they'll only have to play 1 extra game, and the students are in college, so they have to have time to study for finals and do actual classwork. But baseball and football teams do way more traveling and spend way more time out of school, and yet they still somehow manage to do it. And the whole more injuries thing is going to be a football constant until someone comes up with a better equipment or better rules. So 1 extra game won't hurt them that much. 8 playoff teams would allow all 5 Power 5 conference champions to enter the playoffs, as well as some runner-ups and maybe even an outlier. But before we say that this should let UCF get in, let's see who would actually get in based on the ranking. The final week, right before bowl games, the top 8 were Clemson, Oklahoma, Georgia, Alabama, Ohio State, Wisconsin, USC, and Auburn. Where's UCF? First off, you can easily see this 8-team playoff would easily allow all 5 Power 5 conferences to be represented. And the best of the best will battle it out, with the SEC being favored this year due to their dominance, even though the Big Ten was kind of better overall. But where is UCF? In all honesty, I would at least put them in at number 8. I'm sorry, Auburn. You're the one that's gotta go. Auburn had already lost to 2 playoff caliber teams and LSU. With kicking Auburn out, this would give a team with a perfect season a chance to compete at a championship trophy. But sadly, we're still at 4 teams. And out of these 4 teams, would I kick out any to replace with UCF? Let's see. Before bowl games start, UCF's only notable wins were against South Florida and Memphis twice. And Memphis isn't even that good. They lost to Iowa State in their bowl game. No offense to any of those fans. So what made them qualified to be in the top 4? Nothing. If you look at the top 4 teams, they all have big top 10 wins. Clemson against Miami and Auburn, Georgia against Auburn, Bama against FSU, and Oklahoma against Ohio State. All these teams had to prove themselves through tough competition to get here, and UCF didn't. The argument can be made that they should be allowed to play better teams to prove themselves, but guess what? They didn't. Maybe next year they'll get the chance to play better teams and then win now that they're on the college football radar. But they did not have a chance to prove themselves this year. And do I blame them for that? No. They got screwed out of the playoffs from a bad schedule and the 4-team playoff system. But to say that they belong in that 4-team playoff system is a joke. Moving on to the main point against UCF, though, why they're not national champions. Let me just start by saying that the only thing UCF has in common with the playoff teams is destroying Auburn. Auburn is really inconsistent, so it's hard to tell if you actually beat a good team to prove yourself or not. But let's say Auburn wasn't inconsistent and that they are always their same selves. Well, then UCF beating them wouldn't actually be anything special as well. They had already lost 3 times this year, including once to Clemson, and Clemson was beat by the real national champions, Alabama. And beyond this, I can see no arguments as to why UCF should be national champion. They played a weak schedule and beat one SEC team that was highly overrated. And I say they are overrated with proof of them losing 4 times. Unlike the people who say Georgia and Alabama are overrated. If they were overrated, how did Alabama blow out the #1 team in the country? If they were overrated, how did Georgia win the SEC championship? This is pretty solid reasoning for why they aren't champions of anything besides their own weak conference. But I do hope that they get a better chance next year and that the college playoff expands so they have a higher chance of getting in, just like everyone else who deserves it. However, they are allowed to call themselves national champions, no matter how stupid that is. Because remember the AP poll and the coaches poll? They still exist, and they still give away their own national championship claim every year. And even though for the 4 years the college football playoff has been running, they've chosen the same team as the winner, they're still technically allowed to choose whoever they want. So titles are very vague. However, between the coaches poll and the AP poll, the highest UCF was ranked in postseason rankings was 6. Regardless of that, they are technically allowed to call themselves champions just because nothing says they can't. Which is honestly the stupidest thing ever. In that case, any team can technically call themselves champion. In fact, the 5 teams ranked higher than UCF should definitely be allowed to call themselves champion, since according to the AP and coaches poll, UCF is worse. So there we have it, 6 national champions this year. Hooray for college football. Everyone gets a trophy. Seriously, the NCAA just needs to sanction their own playoff bracket and championship game because this is an absolute mess. Jinja. Alright guys, thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed and you want to see more argument videos like this, because I love to argue, click the thumbs up, click the subscribe. Oh my god, stereotypical YouTube outro. Anyway, Atex Film, bye!